Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm Eric Duquesne, and my group and I are going to present you one of the United Nations Sustainable Goals to reduce global inequality. The other members of the group are Natalia Goya, Javier Alfaro, Stefano Yescas, Adam Bemadani, and Shanda Swani. Now, from the very beginning of social life, human societies have faced the problem of sharing the results of joint activities among participants. The solutions they found ranged from equality to inequality, but created more contradictions and conflicts than any other social structure in human history. The aim of this presentation is to provide an insight of causes, consequences, and public policies to reduce global inequality, backed by different examples among countries. Firstly, as I mentioned before, reducing global inequality is one of the UN's commitments for the following decades. But how does the UN define inequality? The definition found on its website, adapted from the Oxford Dictionary, says that inequality is the state of not being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. Geographically talking, the nature of inequality can be within one country or among different countries. UN aims to reduce these both kinds of inequality. What are the reasons? Well, inequality threatens long term social and economic development, harms poverty reduction, and destroys people's sense of fulfillment and self worth. This, in turn, can breed crime, disease, and environmental degradation. Most importantly, we cannot achieve sustainable development and make the planet better for all if people are excluded from opportunities, services, and the chance for a better life. Despite progress in some areas, income inequality continues to rise in many parts of the world for many different reasons. Let's see now what are the causes behind inequality.
Causes of inequality. Education. In every country, education turns out to be different in terms of quality. The better the quality of the education, the more skillful the student will become, which is key to acquire a skillful job. If the quality of education is better, the students will have a higher chance to acquire a skillful job, which will end up raising their income. This is how the skill level determines the wage an employee could get. The difference between a normal job and a more skillful job is that the difference in wages. That difference in wages creates an income inequality. Starting points. This cause explains the difference of self-made and inheritance. Inheritance is when the wealth is already given by the family. This means that some people are born in better economic conditions than others, and this difference influences the development of the person in terms of education and opportunity, having an advantage against other people that have to self-made their wealth. Tax and policy. It depends on if it's progressive or regressive for investors. If it's regressive, it means that it is more difficult for investors to develop their companies, making the gap of income inequality even bigger. With a policy that supports the upcoming of new companies, it is possible to decrease the inequality gap. Technology. Technology development have made our lives easier, but also has reduced seriously the amount of cost. One of them is by cutting the number of employees, raising the number of unemployment drastically. Automatic machines have taken and even upgraded the job of thousands of employees every year. This forces the unemployed to acquire a less skilled job, which will end up with a lower wage, increasing the income inequality. Other causes: global influences. The trading between countries, it may be for goods or services, but it is proven that the globalization increases the income between countries and reduces inequality. This because creates jobs and increases the production for the distribution within countries. Luck and opportunity. Some people are lucky enough to get an opportunity and make the most of it.
Rising inequality can affect more than two-thirds of the world. This income inequality can lead to several consequences. Income inequality has increased in most developed countries and some middle-income countries. Income disparities and the lack of opportunities are creating a vicious cycle of inequality, frustration, and discontent across generations. One of the consequences of inequality within societies is slower economic growth. In unequal societies with wide disparities in areas such as healthcare and education, people are more likely to remain trapped in poverty across several generations. This is a list of some consequences produced by income inequality: health, poverty, housing, redistribution and welfare, social cohesion, education, climate change, migration. I will now proceed to explain some of these consequences in detail. Health. Researchers have found that economic inequality has higher rates of health problems such as obesity, mental illness, or homicides, and lower rates of social goods in countries with higher inequality. Higher material and living standards lead to better health and longer lives. It is argued also that inequality and social stratification lead to higher levels of psychosocial stress and status anxiety, which at the same time lead to depression, parenting problems, and stress-related diseases. This is a graph of 23 unequal developed countries in which they found social health problems lower in countries like Japan and Sweden. Climate change. Climate crisis is having a negative impact on quality of life, and vulnerable populations are bearing the brunt of environmental degradation and extreme weather events. Climate changing is making the world's poorest countries even poorer and could reverse progress made in reducing inequality among countries. Migration. Migration is described both as a powerful symbol of global inequality and a force for equality under the right conditions. Migration tends to increase once country being developed and industrialized, and more inhabitants of middle-income countries than low-income countries migrate abroad. International migration is seen generally as benefiting both migrants, their countries of origin, as money is sent home, and their host countries. In some cases, where migrants compete for low-skilled work, wages may be pushed down, increasing inequality, but if they offer skills that are in short supply or take on work that others are not willing to do, they can have a positive effect on unemployment. This graph shows how Mexico-born population living in the United States rose from 760,000 in 1970 to a peak of 12.7 million in 2007. Education. One of the clearest manifestations of growing economic inequality today is the widening educational achievement gap between the children of the wealthiest and the children of everyone else. This widening gap is largely due to differences in how well prepared children are for school. In eras of economic inequality, wealthier parents have far more resources, both in terms of time and money, to prepare better their children to succeed in school and later in life. This gap may threaten our future economic growth. With only few individuals receiving the best education and enrichment, we are not effectively developing the economic potential of our future workforce.
Now that we've seen some general causes and consequences of inequality, we can focus on specific examples to illustrate how countries deal with such an important issue. The first example we're going to study is Brazil. Being such a big country, Brazil is affected by different types of inequality at different levels. Our analysis is going to focus on its economic and educational disparities. First of all, let's contextualize this discussion. This is a comparison of the Lorenz curve of four countries in order to situate where Brazil stands. As you can see, Italy, a developed country, has a Gini index of 0.31 and a straighter curve than the others, indicating that it's more egalitarian. The same logic applies for Peru, a neighbor country of Brazil, still an unequal country. The Brazilian Lorenz curve is much more distant from the straight blue line, showing a high gap in income concentration. Brazil is actually not that far from Haiti, a country ravaged by war, hunger, and natural disasters. Globally, it constantly ranks amongst the top 15 highest index of Gini, which is absolutely incomprehensible for a country amongst the top 10 highest GDP. Not only does Brazil have a poor performance inequality with its peers, but also inside the country itself. In fact, the regional disparities are also huge. While the South has a more connected and developed economy, the rest of the regions strive to have access to basic products and services. The following map describes the differences in the purchasing power of the Brazilian states. The redder the state, the lower the purchasing power and the higher the living costs in it. The abyss between north, mostly the northeastern region, and the southern states is evident. 100 reais in São Paulo, for example, buys less things than the same 100 reais in other states. Thus, it is difficult to have a uniform population and to take measures that apply for the whole country. One important reason that makes a country enrich is the savings level of this country. In the long term, a low savings level stops the population from getting richer. Brazil follows this logic, which somehow explains why it is such an unequal country. The savings proportion of the Brazilian population is way below the global average and much more distant from high-income countries or peers. Even if Brazil remains a very unequal country, it has significantly reduced its inequality over the past decades, as we can see on the following GIF. The Lorenz curve got much closer to a fair situation, given that income started to be more equally distributed. Indeed, not only Brazil got much richer over these decades, but all the emerging countries have had accelerated growth in this time lapse, such as India or China, leading to a smaller proportion of poor population. A universally known fact is that better education usually leads to better income. In an unequal country like Brazil, this correlation is evident. The following graph shows the evolution of salary returns to education, that is, to what extent a further degree increases salary. The general trend is decreasing, which makes sense as the global offer of qualified jobs is decreasing. However, the gap between having complete higher education and any other educational level has always been immense despite the recent fall. The access to public universities is one of the factors that allowed inequalities to decrease, but having a superior degree remains a privilege in Brazil, given that only nearly 15% of the population has one. We can mention here the inequality in opportunities, an issue that public institutions need to solve. Finally, we're going to discuss the effectivity of one of the government programs, the Bolsa Família program, in order to reduce economic inequality. The Bolsa Família program consists in a monetary transfer to poor households with the objective of eradicating poverty. It has proven to be a powerful policy to do so, and at the international level, it is now considered a model in conditional cash transfer technology and was recognized amongst the most effective actions to combat poverty. It covers over 15 million families and is responsible for around one-fifth of total decline in inequality in the past 2 decades. The PBF is essential to give families access to credit and has had a very positive effect by increasing individuals' chance of accessing financial services by 23% and thus further foment economic activity. The program has positive effects on the entire economy. It has a large multiplier effect on GDP and on total household income, in addition to reducing regional inequalities. Public policies that focus on the poorest people ultimately have a strong relative impact on the incomes of the poorest states, consequently reducing regional income disparity.
When talking about reducing inequality, it is important to talk about countries with different levels and types of inequality and the way each of these countries deals with them. Two countries which hold polarizing stances on inequality are Finland and Saudi Arabia. Through most of its policies, Finland has become one of the most egalitarian countries in the world, which means that it firmly believes that all people are equal and everyone deserves the same rights and opportunities. Saudi Arabia, according to the World Economic Forum, is ranked among the lowest countries in this matter. Saudi Arabia is a monarchy that has 34.81 million people, in which 57.4% of the population is male and 42.6% of the population is female. For 2020, the World Economic Forum ranked 153 countries according to gender parity and found that Saudi Arabia was ranked 146 overall with a score of 0.599 out of 1. In economic participation and opportunity, it ranks 148th with a score of 0.375. In educational attainment, they have a score of 0.983, and even though it is very close to 1, they are ranked 92nd. In health and survival, they are ranked 139th with a score of 0.963, and in political empowerment, they are ranked 136th with a score of 0.077. This is a little bit more in-depth information about the rankings. In Saudi Arabia, there are different ways in which women are oppressed. Women in Saudi Arabia are not allowed to wear makeup or both for clothing, which leads them to commonly wear what is called an abaya, which is a long cloak and a headscarf. Interaction between men and women outside the family is not prohibited, but it is very limited. For the London Olympics in 2012, women who participated were labeled as prostitutes by Saudi critics, and it was until 2017 that women were allowed to be spectators at the Saudi Arabia National Stadium. Women are also not allowed to try on clothes while shopping. They are not allowed to drive, and it was until very recently that women were allowed to have passports and travel without male consent. Saudi Arabia faces other types of inequalities such as employment discrimination, healthcare discrimination, inequalities in family law, and political oppression. Finland is a constitutional republic with 5.54 million people, 50.7% of which are male, 49.3% are female, and it is a country with one of the lowest levels of inequality in the world. According to the World Economic Forum, Finland is ranked third in the world in gender parity with a score of 0.832. With respect to economic participation and opportunity, Finland is ranked 18th with a score of 0.788. In educational attainment, it is ranked first in the world with a score of 1. Regarding health and survival, Finland is ranked 56th with a score of 0.977, and in political empowerment, it is ranked 5th with a score of 0.563. And this is more in depth information about the ranking. Finland has been a gender equality pioneer since the 1850, with activists emphasizing the importance of education for girls, which eventually led to the formation of the first women's organizations in the 1880s. Finland became the first country in Europe in which women obtained full political rights in 1906. In the 1970s, abortions were permitted for social reasons. In 1971, the Employment Contracts Act prohibited discrimination based on gender. 1972 saw the creation of the Gender Equality Council. The Act of Equality between Men and Women was passed in 1987, which prohibits discrimination based on gender and promotes equality between men and women in the workforce. Finland had its first woman president in the year 2000. Finland has also put in place many policies that assure gender equality, such as the Act of Equality between Men and Women, the Employment Contracts Act, the Names Act, and the Gender Neutral Marriage Act.
Okay, hello everyone. Here I'm gonna present you the inequality in the US. Okay, firstly let's talk about this graph. As we could say, there is a rise in the income of the 1% of the population, and let's say it's a high. There is a big gap between the 1% and the other 99% of the population. So we could also talk about the education and wage premium, because only college graduates have experienced the growth in median weekly earnings since 1979 in real terms, and high school dropouts have, by contrast, seen their real median weekly earning decline by about 22%. So, as we could say here in the graph, there is a big gap between the wages of the college graduates and the high school and some college or associate degree. So there is a high inequality in the society and also in the wages. We can also talk about the CAO pay, because recent decades have seen a clear increase in the difference between the CEO compensation and that of average worker in manufacturing or production. Because as we all know, the wages of the CEO increase year after year, and the wages of the normal workers decrease or stay the same. Here in the graph, we could analyze the growth in the wages of the CEO, starting from 24.2 and finishing at 185.3. We can also talk about the wage inequality. For the last 13 years, wage inequality in the US has increased substantially, with the overall level of inequality now approaching the extreme level that prevailed prior in the Great Depression. There is a big gap between the top 1% of the population in the US and the other bottom of the 15% of the population in the US. As we could say, there is 30% or 40% of difference, and it's high. Here, let's talk about the public policies aimed at the better distribution of income. So firstly, we could talk about the increase of the minimum wage. Such a measure take poverty. The impact of the minimum wage goes far beyond the circle of the minority of employees who touch it. Often its level constitutes a reference saying which is used to fix income assistance benefits. So it does help some people to fight the inequality, to fight the poverty in the society. So that's a good thing for poor people. We can also talk about improving the social protections, so like employment in the insurance, pension plan, and a lot of health insurance, a lot of plans to help the poor people. Would also be an effective measure to reduce inequalities. In fact, this protection help maintain an adequate level of income at the time of retirement or when there is an episode of unemployment. So when you're raising the rights and the insurance of people, you could help them in a bad situation, in a bad moment, when they don't have a job, or when they are looking for a job, or when there economic crisis in the country. So it's a good thing for them. It helps them. We can also talk about promoting unionization. All of the public services and social programs in a society promote greater social and economic equality. So public education policies are particularly important because when you have good and efficient public schools, you have efficient people, producers, managers, without paying anything. So they don't have debt. They don't need to pay a son of rich and a son of a poor. They are all equal. So that's a good thing for them. That's a good thing. That's a good measure to fight inequality. Also, we could talk about the use of taxation to reduce the income inequality. As taxes and direct transfers to people are a powerful way to reduce income inequality according to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. To resume, we could say that by increasing the progressivity of the tax, in particular on high and very high incomes, this should be done in a coordinated manner to avoid excessive mobility of the highly skilled workforce. Also, by increasing the production of public goods, particularly those that are intangible, such as education and health, and finally by strengthening the government's role as an insurer. This would reverse the downward trend of automatic stabilizers.
One of the main purposes of the well-known institution, the ONU, is reducing inequality. They have been making analysis and investigation in order to reduce it, and they collected 10 targets. Like, for example, ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, or adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection policies. In the next slide, we can see two graphs. The one on the left compares the share of the population living in extreme poverty between continents. The one on the right shows the ratio of average income of the richest 10% to the poorest 10%, where we can appreciate that Mexico has the highest percentage. As a conclusion, it is obvious to believe inequality must be reduced. However, to achieve this goal, we must work all together in all the solutions proposed previously by my classmates and the famous institution, the ONU. So it should be clear that it's definitely not a one-person problem. So it should be clear that it's definitely not a one-person's problem.